Welcome to this evening's webinar on inducting and supporting volunteers, presented by myself, Lauren Carstadt. So, in this webinar, we'll be discussing the volunteer cycle and what is involved in recruiting, training, supporting and reviewing volunteers within our groups. We will also be looking at which key policies we should be sharing and with all our volunteers, especially with our new volunteers. We'll be looking at support and where it can be found as well. And then we'll have a think about who does these things in your district and groups. Sorry, just having a technical issue there. So inducting and supporting volunteers is vital in keeping our groups running. It's important to induct, support and train new volunteers to help work cooperatively and help have a range of different adults involved. Woodcraft Folk rely on the diversity, skills and talents of our volunteers. Those who volunteer regularly and are full members of the national organisation, those who volunteer regularly as a part of a parent and helper rota, those who volunteer as a one-off to provide advice, guidance or just an extra pair of hands. All volunteers give their time freely and should be supported in doing so, as well as thanked for their hard work afterwards. Some of our volunteers take on vital background roles, such as treasurers and safeguarding officers, and also district coordinators, and some double up with many hats on. All volunteers, regardless of their level or length of involvement, have rights and responsibilities to and within Woodcraft Folk. So, the volunteer cycle, which you may or may not have heard of before, it helps map out the journey of an individual volunteer and their relationship to the organisation. You recruit them, induct them, and then the cycle of training and support should be ongoing, not just a one-hit. Progression to a greater level of involvement is optional. If the progression happened, another cycle would begin to induct, train and support the volunteer in their new role, and so the cycle goes round. I will now break down the cycle and talk about each stage and how this can be taken on by other volunteers to help new volunteers along their journey. Some districts choose to change their roles every year or couple of years and their post office holders. And this means that if someone is to step down or have to take time off their role, there are others who can step up and know what to do. And we'll go through each stage of the cycle now. So there's a graphic of the design, which will help you see a bit more and get a picture in your head of what it looks like. So recruiting volunteers can be an ongoing task, and there are many roles to fulfill whilst running a Woodcraft Folk group, both in the admin side and physically running the group. There are many ways to find new volunteers. Often volunteers are parents of the children in the group or adults with children in other groups in the district. There are also many of our volunteers who don't have children or don't have children in that group. A few examples of where to find these volunteers are signing up to the local volunteer centre, putting ads online for free sites such as Gumtree and Indeed, going to volunteering events, going to local public events and community events. It's always useful to give out a volunteer enrolment form, which can then give you more information about the potential volunteer's experience and interests. If you're interested in finding out more about recruiting adults to your group, there's a webinar that was from the beginning of the last month focusing on this. Look on the website in the resources training section to find it and find out more. You can also find resources for recruiting new volunteers in the growing group section on the website. Once you've recruited your volunteer, the next thing is the induction process. And part of the induction process would be to invite the new volunteer to a session to see what the group gets up to. Once they have decided that they want to help out, membership, references and DBS check can be the next step after this. It's important for new volunteers to feel that we as an organisation are not putting up any barriers to volunteer. For example, the district, if possible, could offer to pay for the first year membership fee if this seems an issue for the new volunteer. Another part of inducting new volunteers is that it's very important to be welcoming and explain things during the first sessions that they attend. It's easy to assume that because someone is interested in helping with the group, that they know exactly what they need to do already without being asked. It's hard in an established group to know where you can help out. So always try to assign new volunteers where they are needed so that they aren't left waiting around and feeling like they aren't doing anything just on the sidelines. Explain things to them, be friendly, and let them lead on a section of the session when they feel comfortable doing that. Some might feel comfortable doing that in their first week, some might need a few weeks before they feel comfortable leading a game or part of the activity. Could be an idea to invite them also, if the timing's right, to a planning session for the coming term. If not, make sure you present them with the upcoming term's plan so that they know what's coming up and can share where their expertise or experience may come in useful, especially in certain activities. And if they're not going to come every week, then they can choose which activities they might be best in, and you can tell them where the gaps are for new adults. So when we have new volunteers and existing volunteers, it's really important to share with them policies that they need to adhere to and have read whilst working with our groups. The most essential, I would say, are the safeguarding policy, the equality policy, and the adult code of conduct. These are important and should be read by all adults, especially those who are volunteering regularly with the groups. The volunteers should let, for example, the safeguarding officer or the group and district contact know when they have read these policies by email or signing the policy and giving it back, and asking any questions that they may have around what they don't understand or want more information about. It would also be a really great idea to share any local district policies, such as policies around risk assessment, transport, communication, and other useful contacts that might come in use along the way whilst running the group. It's also really useful to share the risk assessments, especially of the venue that you normally meet in, and any other risk assessments for a trip, camping trip, or just going out for a campfire as a group night. Hopefully, everybody who's listening knows where to find these in their district, and if not, after this, we'll look up where they can find them. So training is another really important way that we can help support our volunteers to work with our groups. And throughout the year, there are training days and weekends put on by members of staff. It's important to keep an eye on the website calendar to see when the upcoming training is happening and when it's happening close to you, I guess, or far away if you want an adventure. Leader training not only helps new volunteers learn about Woodcraft Folk's aims and principles and getting ideas for programme planning, it's also an introduction to safeguarding and offers a space to meet others who are volunteering with groups in other areas. It's also a great place to share and hear experiences of those other people that you meet. It's not just a great experience for new volunteers, it's also a great experience for volunteers who have been involved for a long time. It's a great way to refresh for some new ideas for your group and also help to support new volunteers who might be attending the training as well. And also a great place to meet, as I say, other people who are running groups across the country. There's also often a chance to learn new games, songs and craft activities which can be passed on and used at your own groups. There can be more specific training offered, normally in a smaller group or to certain districts if they ask for it, focusing just on safeguarding or inclusion or growing groups. Often regional gatherings and annual gathering can also involve some training that can be really useful to take back home with you to others. So, unsurprisingly, volunteers who receive support from other volunteers are more likely to stay within our organisation for longer. If we don't support our volunteers, we'll not retain them and therefore not be able to run our groups in the long term. It's important to continually support our volunteers in their new roles. This may come in many shapes and forms. Some districts have buddies or mentors for new volunteers who can be the go-to person for them to ask questions and advice. There should be lots of communication with the volunteer to find out what support they require and how best to deliver this. The support may lead back to training, but it might just be, as I said before, kind of checking in with them and making sure that they're okay. And as I said before, don't assume that they know exactly what they need to be doing all the time. So always communicate and ask if they're okay. If there is a want for more detailed training on techniques of dealing with challenging behaviour, for example, they can be signposted to resources on the website and also given advice from more experienced volunteers. If the volunteer is working as a treasurer or more of an admin role, they could ask advice from the person who previously held this role if they are unsure, or also be pointed towards webinars and other resources that can be found on the website and elsewhere. So reviewing how our volunteers feel. This is knowing what we can do better to support them and what support they have appreciated and can pass on to others. In the same way that we want to know why our young people enjoy coming to our groups, it's really important to know why people want to volunteer with us and why people stay volunteering with us. If we are asking them for feedback, we should aim to act on this. For example, if a volunteer feels that they need more support or want to take a lead on certain activities, we should support this and do what we can as part of a district and an organisation as a whole. It's important as well when somebody comes to an end of their time of volunteering that we ask them why they're stepping down. This might be for a reason of family issue, moving away, or kind of going into a different career or something that sort of can't be helped. But if it is something to do with the group, then it's really good to know so that, as I say, we can act on this support. So progression into another role in the district is obviously optional. If someone chooses to progress, for example, from a group helper to an assistant treasurer or vice versa, they should be inducted, trained and supported by another member in the same way we have discussed before. And this is how the cycle can continue. So sometimes thanking our volunteers is something that's really hard to do. Some areas have local time banks where you can earn time credits or other kind of rewards for your time that's been volunteered, and sometimes these can be spent in places such as a cinema, swimming pool or museum, etc. We have this deal in St Neots and it works really well. It's a really good incentive for new people to come and volunteer and also give back to our regular volunteers as well. It's also a really good incentive to get people involved in volunteering who wouldn't usually do so, as well as giving something back, as I say, to our long-term volunteers. There are also available to order for free from Folk Office lots of thank you volunteer certificates, which you can see in the corner of the screen. They're also given out regularly. These could be given out regularly to group helpers, or if someone comes in as a one-off to share their skills, they could receive this for their time. There's a National Volunteers Week, usually in June, where organisations are encouraged to thank their volunteers. Maybe this is a good week as a group of volunteers to go out together and have a bit of social time activity away from the group and enjoy each other's company. On this page, there are some useful links, some of which contain what we've already talked about and I've signposted you to, and I'll make the links available in a separate document, which you can find on the website as well. You can see a link to the volunteer toolkit, which includes the guide to volunteering, which is really useful to direct new volunteers to a whole range of different roles we have to offer in the organisation. There are links to example welcome packs for volunteers, as well as the membership secretary handbook, which is kind of going through how to sort of go through the membership process with new volunteers. And there's also the website calendar, which you can keep an eye on. To keep up to date with upcoming training events across the country. So hopefully you can have a think about who in your district does the inducting and supporting of volunteers, and whether you have a volunteer coordinator who does these things, whether it's a shared role, and if you don't have a volunteer coordinator and you feel like some of the volunteers aren't getting the induction or you're not retaining them as you wish, maybe it's something to think about. Thanks for listening, and I hope this is useful for helping to support and induct volunteers in the future in your groups. Thank you. Good night.